Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. We're back with Wine and Realty 614.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Brent.
Brent's here.
Special guest star.
We're all here. So one of the things that has been very interesting to me is there are some things with real estate that are maybe not as positive in the buyer or seller experience. And when that happens, they tend to get angry and maybe hire an attorney. And I will preface this whole episode and every episode hereafter by saying we are not allowed to practice law.
Right.
We are not attorneys. And I am in no way commenting on the legal aspect of this. I am merely bringing you a story. And we'll hash this out as people in the real estate business.
I always want to make a post on like a Facebook or something and ask like, what's the most popular phrase in your industry? And I think in real estate, it has to be, I'm not an attorney, because everywhere you go, everybody has to protect themselves and say, hey, I'm not an attorney.
So what's interesting to me in Ohio is that you do not have to have an attorney helping you with the purchase. You are completely allowed to hire someone if you want. However, and I only speak from my experience in Chicago because that's where I'm from and purchased a home there. You do have to have an attorney involved. So it's you know,
One of my clients actually, he hired an attorney because his family was from Chicago and they told him he had to.
And that's you had to there. So
Yeah.
it's just kind of an interesting. Now we do always start the transaction by saying that the contract and the forms that we do send to clients when they're purchasing or
They're
selling
written by
to them,
attorneys.
They're written by attorneys, and they're you know, we all as real estate agents are provided to them by the Board of Realtors and
The Columbus Bar Association. So all these standard forms that the Columbus Board of Realtors has, it goes through a full review process with their attorneys and then goes to the Columbus Bar Association and gets endorsement through the actual Columbus Bar Association, and it gets reviewed on a regular basis.
Yeah, so you don't have to in the Ohio. Well, I don't know all Ohio, but in Columbus, which is our experience, you don't have to hire an attorney if you do not want to. You can, and you have the right. So, with that all being said, now we're getting.
I was not told like what this was, so I need to know.
This is what makes this episode fun, and hopefully, if it's interesting to everyone, then we will continue with this kind of thing. I don't know.
You'll get surprised next time.
That's it. So that's it. So Amanda will have to do the research next time, and I won't know. But what we are talking about today. Well, let me ask this. When you are, right, we're going to get, and maybe be careful about how you answer. When you are sending forms, say a residential property disclosure to a client, or when your client is filling out a residential property disclosure, do you review that prior to them? Say, let's do it from the buy side because that's where one of these cases is from. Do you read the property disclosure prior to sending it to your client?
Briefly.
Yeah, I do as well. Quickly.
I think it is their responsibility because I cannot tell them what they are going to be worried about.
Right.
They need to read it.
So what we're talking about today is negligence. Okay. And if a real estate agent, broker can be in trouble for negligence get sued and be responsible for something maybe the buyer didn't know or didn't see.
My quick answer is no.
Yeah, well, I think that, you know, liability.
And that's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining.
This is over.
Well, liability is a huge problem in today's society. I mean, you can get sued at any time for anything, right? Absolutely. So the National Association of Realtors has on its site a bunch of cases that, you know, they may not be timely. They're not anything that has happened, you know, in the recent past. But one of these cases that I found was interesting was now in this the sales rep was not was not held responsible for. I have to put you away. It's too much. So for those of you maybe just listening, we're also going live on Instagram, and it's just a lot to try to concentrate on what I'm talking about and hold the camera. So anyway.
And listeners should probably follow on Instagram as well. What's that?
Yeah, so there is a Instagram account called Wine and Realty 614. Follow us there, and you will get live video and pictures. And
More content.
It's the Gram stuff. So anyway, getting back to this. There was a MLS listing. Wait, no, hang on. There was a team in Texas sued because they had given their buyer the residential property disclosure. Mm-hmm. And on the residential property disclosure, the seller had indicated that, yes, there was water issues with the home, but they didn't complete it. They didn't fill out the portion that's, you're supposed to describe the problem on. And as the real estate agent, they didn't tell the buyer that that portion needed to be filled out. So when the buyer completed the purchase and moved into the home, and they had all these problems with the house and flooding, and there was erosion, and it had been a flooding problem for a significant amount of years.
Whose fault is that?
Well, that's
I was going to say, that's
ultimately
gonna be an
the lawsuit.
question, yeah.
So that is the lawsuit. So now,
I'm more curious about which agent got sued on which side.
Yeah, it was the buyer's agent, the buyer's broker, and they're the ones who got sued because the buyer didn't know that that portion was supposed to be filled out. It just indicated, yes, that there was a problem with flooding, but it did not say what the flooding was.
I'm surprised they didn't bring the listing agent in as well, saying that they didn't.
Well, yes, it was, but they didn't know that.
How could they not know it was a flood zone? Because
was it a cash deal?
No, the buyers
they have to have flood insurance.
This was okay. So I should say this is in Texas, which is different than Columbus. And this was a long time ago too. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So now you have to have flood insurance, and I think I always tell my clients when I'm listing a house, I'm like, tell everything that you know, because if you don't, your neighbors will. I mean, it's true.
Oh, and how many showings have you been on that a neighbor has come out and starts talking?
Your neighbors are going to talk.
And spilling the tea.
If you have someone out to your house for an issue, and they have already been out to your house for an issue, they are going to tell the new buyers, and you will get sued. You need to disclose everything. And so I guess getting back to what you're saying, like, I don't know who's liable for that. Like, as a buyer's agent, like, or as a seller's agent or a buyer's agent, like, I'm not responsible for reading your, like, the issues with the property that you're buying and telling you that you should be not okay with it.
Well, I think that there have been times where I have been on the listing side and the buyer's agent has said, this is not filled out properly. Mm-hmm. And so then I go back to the seller and say, look, can you fill this out properly? And to be quite honest, the property disclosure is kind of hard to keep track of line by line by line. There's a lot going on there, and sometimes as a person filling it out, they would miss something.
Yeah.
In this case, they may or may not have missed something. I mean, you don't know.
I think that the seller should only be held reliable.
Well, yeah.
Because they say, like, in the property disclosure, it says, like, check yes or no. And if no, explain why.
Well, and so they didn't.
Yes, explain why.
But they didn't explain why.
Yeah.
And the court ended up ruling. So it goes through a series, and then gets thrown back to the small claims court from the bigger courts because they were like, it's got to go back there. And ultimately, the court found that the buyers were first-time home buyers, and there's no way that they would have known that portion should have been.
It says it. Well, I guess I don't know in Texas.
I was gonna say the form may be different.
It says if no or yes, why?
Right.
Yeah, but. Okay, with that being said, how many times have you sent the paperwork?
How many times have you filled out a form?
Like, how many times have you sent the paperwork to someone And, you say as agents, make sure you read what you're signing.
Right.
And they're not, because
like,
the ding and the ding and the ding and the ding happens
if you do
that they've
your
signed.
due diligence on that, like, whose fault is it really? It's really the seller's fault, because they didn't explain why. They should have explained why. It says if yes or no, explain why. I mean, how many times have you been in a doctor's office and like, is this what's wrong with you? If yes or no, like, explain.
Well, and to be fair, it doesn't say if the sellers were also sued. They may have been.
Yeah.
But in this case,
I'm
it
sure
is
they
the real
were.
estate
I'm
agents.
sure that they were sued.
You would hope.
I would think, yeah. I mean, that's just not, I don't know. Like, but it's something for us to think about, that
I'm still amazed that a lender wouldn't have caught that it was in a floodplain, because that's their investment,
Well,
right?
they also had an inspector come, and the inspector did not accurately indicate what the flooding lines were from either.
I don't know that it's fair to an inspector, though.
I mean, isn't that what we hire them to do?
Yes and no.
That's an interesting question on if
That's
an
a whole
inspector
nother
brings
episode.
that in. Yeah.
The way this reads is, additionally, the seller's disclosure form left unchecked boxes concerning improper drainage, present flood insurance, located in a 100-year floodplain, or located in a floodway.
If they didn't,
hang on. An inspector discovered water markings in a crawl space, but incorrectly opined that those probably came from a leaking water line.
how would they know? How are they supposed to know?
I don't know. Any
They're not
inspectors
supposed
want to comment?
Inspectors are not supposed to be researching the house.
I mean, but
That's what we have title for. We have lenders for. Like, those are, and that's what we have the seller for, to disclose information like that. Like, I completely disagree that the inspector should be held liable.
well,
Like,
it doesn't say the inspector was liable. It
think-
just says the inspector didn't correctly
I honestly
indicate
think
what the
it's
flooding
really
was from.
between, I think it's like the listing agent, but like, how would the listing agent know? Like, I didn't get a listing once because I saw water running through the basement. And I was like, you have to disclose that. And they got upset.
I showed a house once that had water running through the basement, and I was like, you can't buy this.
They were like,
this is a
my
major
seller,
problem.
the potential seller was like, well, that's never happened before. And I was like, I understand that, but I see it, and you have to disclose that.
Sure,
I didn't
it's
get the
never
listing.
happened before.
I didn't get the listing.
Yeah,
I wonder why.
I wonder why. So one of the interesting, I know when it comes to filling out the property disclosure on the real estate, on our, like if we were the seller's representative, we should not be anywhere near the seller filling that out.
No.
That
I just
that is
asked me to fill it out once. I was like, absolutely not.
No. And they ask questions like, how should I answer this? How should I answer that? And it all comes down to you answer to the best of your
ability.
knowledge.
Yeah.
Or ability.
Sounds like you've said that a couple times before. As you say in unison.
Yeah. What I will say is liability is a huge thing in this industry.
Absolutely.
Right?
I don't want to get sued.
So there is another case to chat about briefly. And it is, again, inaccurate MLS information having to do, ironically, with the property disclosure. And actually, this doesn't, but I would imagine this would. Hang on. No,
Just
what
kidding.
I would, because in my head, this is a question that's on our property disclosure. So I don't know that this may or may not have been on the. Anyway, it has nothing to do with that. What it has to do with is the information that's in the MLS. And this house was incorrectly, the agent incorrectly entered it as saying it was on city sewer. It actually had septic. And again, the inspector did not say it was on septic, which I would think.
Did they know?
I mean,
Do they know, and did the buyer acknowledge what they told them? And you have to pay for a separate inspection.
here.
I was
Where
gonna
is this
say what state is this in?
Yeah. So here you have to pay for a
North
separate
Carolina.
inspection.
This
Okay.
is in North Carolina.
Here, if you don't pay for that, then that is, there's nothing that they can
Well,
say.
that's a
They
newer
are
law
there-
here, though.
they-
That is
no,
not.
it's not.
Yeah, it is. It's only in the last few years that it is required to have a septic inspection.
It is not required. That is optional. Well and septic is
Google.
optional. No, it is. It is optional.
I think.
It is optional. You do not have to have it done. I recommend that you have it done.
Well, any
However,
inspection is not required.
If that is
Yeah.
listed
Yeah.
wrong, that is completely on the listing agent. Like that's not anybody else.
Okay.
And so that's not fair to the buyer. That's not fair to the inspector.
This was voted no liability toward the
So who was
MLS
actually sued?
information.
So the listing agent was sued.
So the listing broker, the court case was whether the listing broker can be held liable for incorrectly stating in the listing that a property was connected to city sewer.
Absolutely.
When the property
disagree.
actually had a septic tank. So the way this was found out was that
Apparently
2
I'm
years
opinionated.
after the purchase, so the buyers were buying this house for their daughter to rent. They were going to rent it back to their daughter and her friends. I think that's out the window. Timeline. And for those of you that are listening, we have someone keeping track of our time. So anyway, 2 years after the purchase of the home, raw sewage was discovered in the front yard. And they were like, what? And then they had a plumber come out, and the plumber was like, this is not on city sewer. This is actually a septic tank. And there's a leak in the septic tank. So the buyers sued for the repair.
I would.
Yeah, for the repair. And then another leak had happened. So then they eventually hooked up to the city sewer. And so the lawsuit was for the damages that they had.
So I have a question for you then. So in a listing appointment, did you ask that question? And what if the
Yes.
So
well,
what
it's
if
on
so
our
what-
property disclosure.
So
They
what
do
if
have
they
to
told
answer.
you wrong?
area,
Rural.
rural area, I will ask if it's well and septic.
There's areas in Columbus that have well and septic though too.
Absolutely.
It's on the
and
property
It's on the property
disclosure.
disclosure.
Yeah.
So if they don't fill that out correctly, if it's not listed correctly, I don't expect, my buyer to know that. And if I'm told the wrong information, because buyers usually ask that. And honestly, like for someone to blame an inspector, like that's not okay.
But so it seems like in this case, it would
The
have to
inspector
be
is
the
not
property
who
disclosure.
was blamed. So
Property disclosure, absolutely.
So if the property disclosure
Why
was
was it not
correct,
filled out correctly?
and then the MLS information was entered
So
incorrectly,
I
Can
see
I
your
say
point. I
something?
definitely see your point. So
excuse me, pardon me. There's a little bit more to the story. So on
she's not giving us all that information.
Well, it's a conversation. So on the MLS listing on the selling side, it says information deemed reliable but not guaranteed.
Okay.
When the buyer's agent printed out the listing, it did not have that on there.
What do you have on the property disclosure?
It doesn't bring up the property disclosure. I don't know about the property disclosure in North
We
Carolina.
need to write them.
We need to find out more. So anyone who knows about Crawford versus Mintz,
Because
Junior,
I agree. Like I do agree. That is what's on the property disclosure. And if they don't know, then they can say they don't know. I don't think you can't hold an inspector reliable. You can't hold agents reliable. Like you have to hold the seller and pretty much the seller.
that's what I find interesting is if it's on the disclosure, and even if the agent mistakenly puts it into the MLS wrong,
Yeah.
the buyer's still getting the property disclosure with a chance to review, and they could have been like, hey, wait a second, this says it's septic, and in the MLS it doesn't, and question that. So
if it's
an
not
interesting
in a suburb, then I ask. If it's not on the property disclosure. But I guess I've never ran into that because I've always been told. I guess I asked during listing appointments.
do you ask about well and sewer and septic and
if it's not in a suburb? Like I had a Pataska listing and they had a well, but they also had city water.
because I have had it come up where it's indicated as well. So I had a house that was in Columbus and it was on septic, and the city was going to make everyone go to the city sewer. It was in that area, and it wasn't a thing when the seller was selling. It was not. It had been a thing, and then the company that the city hired went out of business, and then it wasn't a thing anymore. There was nothing from the city indicating that was still going to happen. But then after the home was sold, maybe a year later, it became a thing again. And then the buyers were like, you knew. And it wasn't. So what do you do in that case? it's,
It's all well. I mean, it's really what an attorney sees.
well, and that's ultimately what every answer
Yeah.
is that we end up giving, right? I mean,
And and this is just more so my curiosity. Like, would they have not purchased that property had they known that information, or is it they're just upset?
they
so
just
they're
got
trying
mad
to get
that they had
somebody.
to hook up. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Somebody else sued, or something happened, so that's why they
Right,
sued, as
right.
opposed to, oh yeah, we wouldn't have purchased the property.
I just kind of feel like as a real estate agent, when I go to a property, you see certain things that would indicate well and septic or sewer hookup. I mean, you see those caps, like the septic caps, and not everything that's on septic has a well, and not everything that has a well necessarily has septic, but you do see indications of that, which would lead me to think, let's maybe look at the property disclosure. And
right.
So you think the listing agent should have been sued?
well, no, I mean, so
I think
but
it-
to be fair
it's
to this
not
case,
fair.
the listing agent's MLS listing did say it's not guaranteed information, and that's what they were holding, because then what happened, the buyer's agent, what they filled out, what they gave, did not have that disclaimer on it.
It's really about the property disclosure, I think.
I think so too.
And I think that's got to be I mean, now as a homeowner, I'm scared if I ever sell my house. Like, I better really make sure I nail this property disclosure.
Yeah.
And that's
Well-
what I've told people. Like, and people get scared. Like, when I
But
tell them
here's
that.
the thing is that also, that is not filled out correctly all the time. And ultimately it comes back to the seller filling it out
Did
to
they
the
know?
best of their
Did they
knowledge.
know?
Right.
And that's a whole nother discussion.
Well, it is. It
Because
is,
a lot of
because-
times they don't know until you get that same professional in there and you get sued, which I've seen happen.
Well, mold is a big thing
Yeah.
in that case. There's, you can't see what's behind. Well,
Absolutely.
and foundational issues in a finished basement. I mean, you just can't see what's behind walls or under
Or
floors.
unfinished, crawl space.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So,
So,
yeah. Well,
So
other
that's all.
A lot of other topics. We can dig into those later.
we can. So it's just kind of interesting. I think that there's a lot of,
You can't be sued in real estate.
You can be sued in daily life.
Yeah.
No matter what. But I
Yeah.
think that we do the best that we can, and we do the best with the knowledge that we have
Yes.
at the time. And,
Just don't lie.
well, that's it. I mean,
If you don't lie,
live
then-
your life, don't lie.
Yeah, if you don't lie, then you're probably going to be good to go.
I was gonna say, it definitely seems like that full disclosure is better, in the long
Yeah,
run. While yes,
absolutely.
maybe you think, and I think some people overestimate what that somebody else is going to perceive as a problem,
Yeah.
and but it's better to give that full disclosure and say, hey, this is
Yeah.
exactly what I know.
Yeah.
And if there's a minor problem, you fix it
Right.
on the front end, and it's going to be
Right.
it's a an ounce of prevention instead of a pound of cure, right?
For the first question, it was there was water intrusion, but like who? Some people care about that, some people don't. Like, where are you buying? Like, it's normal downtown.
I think
you
that
know?
yeah, right.
So
right,
it just
yeah.
depends. Like, it's really like it just depends.
Yeah. It all
So.
depends.
But always tell the truth.
Don't lie.
Don't lie.
Buy a house.
That was amazing. You both just locked eyes
We're
and
so in tune.
knew what
This
to
is why
do.
we do this together.
All right.
All right.
guys.
Well, cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
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 Cheers, everyone.
clink, clink,
clink. All right. Bye.
Bye.